we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Can I let the doors be open? Let the doors be open. Que l'on ouvre les portes. Merci. Déclaration de député.
Statements by members.
Honourable member from Brampton South.
Mr. Speaker, keeping our community safe is important to Brampton residents. While community safety is a shared jurisdiction with the provinces and municipalities, this government has been working hand in hand with our law enforcement and with other partners. We are strengthening Canada's criminal code and our community safety by keeping repeat violent offenders in prison with Bill C-48, supporting the CBSA with a historic investment that make our border secure. Most importantly, Mr. Speaker, we are working collaboratively with our law enforcement partners in Peel and right across the country to combat auto theft. I know that fighting car theft is an important issue. This is why earlier this year we made an important investment, $120 million to Ontario to combat gangs. In partnership with CBSA and other agencies, Peel Regional Police have successfully recovered with $130 million worth of stolen vehicles this year and put many criminals behind the bar. We committed to continuing to work to strengthen measures to combat auto thefts to ensure a safe environment for Brampton, Mr. Speaker.
I'd like to remind all members as much as possible to stick to their 60-second time limit for statements by members. The honourable member from Prince Albert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to congratulate Mr. Bruce Vance of Prince Albert, who was inducted into the Raiders Wall of Honour. Bruce spent 14 years with the Raiders and was responsible for bringing many special events to our community. He's also the former president of the Crescent Heights Community Club. He is the former co-manager of the Man Northway Northern Bears and co-founder of the Girls Prairie League of Softball. Despite being diagnosed with colon cancer for the second time in 2020, Bruce continues to take on whatever challenges life may throw at him. Just this past year, the Northern Bears hosted an event with his team jersey. They auctioned off the jerseys and raised $23,000 for the Victoria Hospital Foundation and the Cancer Foundation of Saskatchewan. Bruce, you are an idol in our community. We thank you for your service. Please keep up the good fight. Thank you.
You're here.
The honourable member from Windsor-Tecumseh.
Mr. Speaker, this weekend I attended the grand reopening of the Ron Ianni Law School building at the University of Windsor after transformative renovations. I met generations of alumni like Frank and Peter who made the drive to Windsor to reconnect over the two-day celebration. On hand were the Chief Justice of Canada and Ontario. The $38 million renovation is truly spectacular. The architects pulled off the impossible, inserting light into a stone. The moot court is a showpiece with gorgeous views of the campus, the Ambassador Bridge, and Assumption Church. A generous gift provided by the Rodzik family, the court is fully accessible and one of the 3 rooms set up to host smudge ceremonies. Seeing all the alumni and donors highlighted the real sense of family and pride that are the hallmark of UWindsor Law. And I know my predecessor and the founding dean, the late Honourable Mark McGuigan, was smiling proud on this day too. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Then I have Député de Shefford.
The honourable member for Shefford. Mr. Speaker, if you hear Granby, a lot of people will think about the zoo. The zoo was created in 1953. It was the brainchild of Horace Boivin, visionary mayor of the time and a passionate animal lover. In 2023, the Granby Zoo celebrates its 70th anniversary. The zoo has stood the test of time. It has modernized. It has created moments of wonder and memorable experiences for families, for young people and older people alike. It's a major economic and tourism lever for the region and even for Quebec. its mission to protect animal species and promote the conservation of biodiversity is essential, and it's also a major international attraction. The whole of Granby Zoo proudly displays giant statues which represent some exotic species that can be found there, from the pink elephant near Lac Boivin to the blue gorilla and the yellow meerkat. Let's take advantage of this 70th birthday to visit or revisit the Granby Zoo. Happy 70th birthday. The Honourable Member for Sherbrooke. Mr. Speaker, in June, the Sherbrooke Chamber of Commerce awarded the title of the 2023 Eastern Township Resident of the Year to Jacques Fortier. Mr. Fortier received this honorary title with his typical modesty, despite his very impressive track record. Jacques Fortier is passionately involved in the Sherbrooke community. As a claims adjuster for 45 years, he helped people during the ice storm and the Lac-Mégantic tragedy. Mr. Fortier also invests a great deal of time in volunteer work, first in the healthcare network, where he oversaw a major redevelopment project at the Hôtel Dieu de Sherbrooke and played a decisive role in setting up the Mother and Child Center. He is an avid sports fan. He made a major contribution to the return of Majors hockey in Sherbrooke, and he's still a shareholder and vice president of marketing for the Sherbrooke Phoenix. Mr. Fortier has been involved in a number of election campaigns. He is always unfailingly supported by Marie-Claude, love of his life. They form a remarkable couple. They're always there for their community. All of my congratulations to Jacques Fortier, Eastern Township's Resident of the Year 2023.
Member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
After 8 years, this flailing Liberal NDP Prime Minister flip-flopped and admitted him and his scam of the century, the carbon tax, are just not worth the cost. The Governor of the Bank of Canada confirmed by scrapping this inflationary scam, it would bring down the cost of everything and put a massive dent into the inflationary crisis. It's hypocritical for this Prime Minister to only put a pause on this tax where his polling numbers are low, yet punish those Canadians that don't vote Liberal by quadrupling it. They sold this carbon tax scam to Canadians by telling them they would get more back in phony rebates than what they would pay into it, and that somehow it would fix the environment. Both proven false. Even a Liberal minister admits that Liberal MPs are utterly useless and have no voice in their own caucus. Only our common sense Conservative leader will axe the tax to keep the heat on and bring home lower prices for all Canadians. So why doesn't this out-of-touch Liberal Prime Minister shove this carbon tax scam and his woke policies where his polling numbers are? In the gutter.
The Honourable Member from London North Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to honour two new inductees into the London and District Business Hall of Fame. The first is Alan Drullo, President of Drullo Holdings. He helped make the company one of the country's largest and leading real estate development and property management firms. On top of that, he is an important philanthropist in our community. He has supported, among others, the Kidney Foundation. He's supported the London Food Bank, Mission Services, Habitat for Humanity, the Grand Theatre, and he continues to be steadfast in the community's vision for the future. Jill Wilcox, the owner of Joe's Table, is the second. She's an award-winning specialty food and kitchen store entrepreneur in London. In addition to running a very successful business for more than 25 years, Jill has been a leading entrepreneur organizing cooking classes and culinary tours to Europe. Another philanthropist, Mr. Speaker, as well. Since 2012, she's helped to fund food-related education projects in support of Investing in Children, Youth Opportunities Unlimited, Growing Chefs, and others. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
The Honourable Member.
Member from Humber River Black Creek.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm extremely honoured to recognize the stellar career path of the Honourable Judy Foote, a colleague and a friend to many of us in this House. As she is leaving her position of Lieutenant Governor of Newfoundland and Labrador, I would like to thank her for dedicated service to Canadians for over 30 years in politics. Ms. Foote brought the best practices from the places where she started, in education and television journalism. She made history, being the first female lieutenant governor for her province. As Prime Minister announced earlier, Ms. Foote brought passion, energy, and an unwavering dedication to serving Canadians during her historic mandate. Her diverse experience of public service enriched not only her province, but the whole of Canada. On behalf of my family, my colleagues, and I I want to thank you, my dear friend. We wish you all the success in your future endeavors. Thank you.
The honourable member from York Simcoe.
Mr. Speaker, this desperate NDP Liberal government's plan to pause the carbon tax on home heating won't help 97% of Canadians. This includes residents of York Region. They rely on natural gas and propane to heat their homes. The Rural Economic Development Minister said an exemption wasn't offered across Canada because those regions didn't vote Liberal. Newsflash, 70% of York Region is represented by Liberals. It seems there is no carbon tax relief for York Region families because of the incompetence of Liberal MPs in Markham, Richmond Hill, Aurora, Newmarket. These York Region Liberals are just not worth the cost. Instead of treating Canadians like contestants on a reality show, pitting them against each other, picking winners, losers, and survivors, how about we axe the tax and vote all these Liberals off the island?
The honourable member from Vaughan Woodbridge.
Mr. Speaker, making sure Canadians are and feel safe in their community is a priority for our federal government. It is not optional, it is not political. In my riding of Vaughan Woodbridge, public safety is at the centre of many conversations. We know that the federal government has a leading role to play. Vaughan residents support the cooperation and collaboration seen from all levels of government, law enforcement and victim advocates working together to crack down on crime, keep guns away from our streets, and protect Canadians. Mr. Speaker, Canadians ask that we strengthen the justice system to keep repeat offenders behind bars. As our response, our government introduced Bill C-48, bail reform, which amends the criminal code and reinforces public confidence in Canada's justice system. We also introduced a national freeze on handguns, supported the province of Ontario with $120 million to combat guns and gangs, and over $500 million to CBSA to protect our borders. By providing the funding, working with all levels of government, and passing impactful bail reform legislation, we are doing everything it takes to keep Canadians safe.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, just under a year ago, we Conservatives asked the government to cancel the carbon tax on home heating. All the parties in this House, including the Bloc Québécois, voted against it. It costs a lot to vote for the Bloc. And then, last Thursday, just as the Prime Minister was taking a nasty beating in the polls, he announced a temporary break for home heating oil. And he only did this announcement with Atlantic MPs. Why did he do that? Well, the Minister for Rural Economic Development said that all the other regions had to do was vote Liberal. Where are the MPs for Quebec when it comes to defending their constituents' pocketbooks? This measure is unfair to 97% of Canadians, Mr. Speaker, and not only that, but it divides Canadians. Even the architect of the Liberal carbon tax, Catherine McKenna, is heartbroken by this Liberal flip-flop, and the current Minister of the Environment has said that there will be no more concessions or else he'll be out the door. Things are clearly going well for the Liberals, Mr. Speaker, but we Conservatives are very clear. Eliminating carbon taxes is common sense.
The honourable member from Simcoe Grey.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this Liberal NDP government is desperate. Its polling numbers are in a free fall, and it will now do anything to stay in power, even telling Canadians, vote for us or we'll tax you more. In pausing his carbon tax until the next election for Atlantic Canadians only, the Prime Minister has admitted that his gimmicky carbon tax rebate didn't give them more than they paid in. But yet he stands here and tells rural Ontarians we're getting more back than we pay in. He seems confused, Mr. Speaker, but Canadians aren't. They know this Prime Minister can't be trusted. They know he is not worth the cost. Seniors in my community are telling me they're worried about their heating costs. Some have even told me that they can't buy fresh vegetables anymore. When will the Prime Minister stop the games, treat all regions fairly, axe the carbon tax, and give all Canadians a break?
The honourable member for Orléans.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Privilege of attending the Poppy campaign kickoff of the Orléans Royal Canadian Canadian Legion. It was an honor beyond words to place the very first poppy on the esteemed lapel of Veterans Warrants retired Serge Millen, a gesture symbolizing our immense gratitude for his service and sacrifice to our country. Let's all help our Canadian Legions by donating to them and by wearing our poppy with pride. In addition, I extend my warmest congratulations to Andrea Baird, owner of the AKA Beauty Concept, as she celebrated a decade of successful business in Orléans. I was so impressed by Andrea's leadership as she was telling me that her salon is a certified sustainable salon, a green circle salon. That means that up to 95% of the beauty waste is recovered and recycled, giving beauty waste a new life and joining the fight against climate change. Merci.
Wow. The honourable member from Algoma, Kapuskasing, Manitoulin.
Algoma, Manitoulin, Kapuskasing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, Canadians were collectively heartbroken by the barbaric act of intimate partner violence that took the life of Angie Sweeney and her 3 young children in Sault Ste. Marie. As we grieve for Angie and her children, we must redouble our efforts against intimate partner violence. Gender-based and intimate partner violence in Canada has increased for 5 consecutive years. In 2021, the rate of IPV was 336 victims per 100,000 people. Women and girls represent almost 70% of victims. En 2021, the total
In 2021, gender-related homicide rate for Indigenous women and girls was more than triple the rate of gender-related homicides overall. Ontario had a 39% increase of women and girls killed by violence with a male offender from 2018 to 2022.
This epidemic cannot continue. We must implement the recommendations from last Parliament's Justice Committee report on stopping coercive and controlling behavior in intimate relationships. Women need us to stand up for them now more than ever. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Beauport, Côte-de-Beaupré, Île d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Mr. Speaker, there have been many closures in our very important fishing industry, but the federal government has not offered any compensation or any sufficient alternatives. And to this day, all the fishermen from all the areas in my riding are closing or on the brink of closing. There are all sorts of problems. They're faced with countless problems, and the processing plants are also suffering. There is a true crisis in the fishing industry, Mr. Speaker, and it will be hard to find the next generation. Our fishing industry has its limits, but there are solutions. For example, community fishing licenses, ecosystem management, financial compensation. We need to protect our water and everything living in our water. We need to ensure that our resources can be renewable. We need to take action quickly, and the Bloc Québécois is ready to work with the government and to support this industry. Thank you.
The honourable member from Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, outright incompetence. That's how senior officials to the Prime Minister described the scandal around the $1 billion Green Slush Fund, 40 million of which is under investigation for suspicious payments. Leaked audio has been recently released, and you won't believe what a Liberal government official said about it. He calls the fund a sponsorship scandal level kind of giveaway. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, he is simply not worth the cost. The unholy alliance of the NDP Liberal spending, scandals, and corruption has now caused sponsorship scandal 2.0. The previous Liberal sponsorship scandal began with an Auditor General investigation, and today we learn that the Auditor General is now investigating the taxpayer abuse at the $1 billion Green Slush Fund. Liberal corruption must stop. Common sense Conservatives will finally clean up this mess.
The honourable member for Bourassa. Mr. Speaker, It is a great honor for me to have spent 16 years as a member of the National Assembly in Quebec City and a member of Parliament in Ottawa. And I am the only MP of Haitian origin. But I must step aside. Thank you to the Prime Minister for giving me this opportunity to serve Canadians.
The House of Commons for the friendship. Merci.
Thank you to the Ordre des CPA for the Chartered Accountant Emeritus Award and the prestigious title of Fellow. Thank you to UQAM for the Hommage en Enseignement Award. Thank you to the Right Honourable Raymond Hanadishan for the Governor-General's Medal for my work at Revenue Canada. Thank you to Jean Charest for his true friendship. Thank you to the people of Bourassa, to my brothers and sisters, to those who have supported me and worked for me. And a heartfelt thank you to my wife, our children, their spouses, and our grandchildren.
Merci pour tout sacrifice nous fait pour moi. Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, with great emotion, I informed the Prime Minister that I will not be running for another term.
Questions, questions orales.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. When the Prime Minister flip-flopped and put a pause on his carbon tax for home heating, that didn't do anything to help Quebec. Quebecers are going to have to pay the second carbon tax, which is going to increase not only the cost of gas, but also the cost of groceries. And why? Why is the Prime Minister increasing taxes on Quebecers? Well, it's to fund a $1 billion fund that a senior official put in place as and has called a second sponsorship scandal. Why is the Prime Minister forcing Quebecers to pay for another Liberal scandal? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a short question for the Conservative leader. What is the Conservatives' plan to protect the environment? The answer is very simple. No plan. No plan, no solutions. A real solution would be to put in place a plan to fight climate change for the future. A real solution would be to protect our environment for future generations. The Conservative leader must know that Canadians don't have a short memory, Mr. Speaker. They'll remember that what the Conservatives did when they were in power. Chop, 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 Mr. Speaker. They won't take the risk. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
The Prime Minister promised that Wednesdays would be Prime Minister's question period. His public itinerary indicates he's in Ottawa, and he was even spotted in the building. So the question is for the Prime Minister about the carbon tax chaos he has unleashed. He's paused the tax on some heat for some people, leading the Government of Alberta to threaten a lawsuit, the Government of Saskatchewan to threaten not to collect the tax, NDP provincial parties in the West even turning against it, and some First Nations saying the entire thing is illegal. Will he reverse all of this chaos and just axe the tax?
Before I have the Honourable Minister answer the question, I just want to remind all members it's important not to do indirectly what you can't do directly. As the Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let's actually bring the temperature down and talk about exactly what we've done here. We've accelerated the replacement of home heating oil for heat pumps. Mr. Speaker, it's a national program, and if the Premier of Alberta and the Premier of Saskatchewan want to make sure that people who heat their homes with oil in those provinces have access to the same heat pumps, you know what they can do, Mr. Speaker? They can join 3 Atlantic provinces and BC and sign up for a plan and help low-income people in their province. Will they do it? Time will tell.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the question was for the Prime Minister.
That's right.
He has unleashed carbon tax chaos across the country. After saying he would never bend, he backed down because I kept beating him in these debates in the House of Commons. And he put a 2-year pause on some heating oil for some people, causing Saskatchewan to threaten not to collect the tax, Alberta to threaten a lawsuit, 6 provinces coming out against the plan, First Nations saying it's illegal. If he's so proud of himself and what he's done, then why won't he stand up now and defend it?
Again, I ask all members, please, if you do not have the floor, to refrain from speaking so that we can hear the question and we can hear the answer. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition seems to be too busy patting himself on the back to actually do his homework. At the end of the day, heating oil costs anywhere between 2 and 4 times the price of natural gas. It is a particular driver of energy poverty in this country. We have taken steps forward to improve affordability by enabling the implementation of heat pumps, which will save people up to $2,500 a year, but doing so in the context of a plan to fight climate change, something, again, that the Leader of the Opposition has done nothing about in the years since he became the Leader of the Opposition.
They're here.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Badly for that Liberal minister who's been abandoned by his leader, who the leader of their government won't even stand and defend his own decisions. We know that on Thursday, he suddenly, after having his door beat down by terrified Liberals about to lose their seats, decided to flip-flop and bring in a temporary pause on a tax until after the election, dividing Canadians once again into 2 different classes. If he's so proud of how he's divided people, if he's so proud of how he's forcing Canadians to choose between heating and eating, why won't he have the guts to stand up and say so now?
The Honourable Minister.
I'll tell you who's feeling abandoned by their leader. Conservative Albertans, New Democrat Albertans, Liberal Albertans. You know why, Mr. Speaker? Because Danielle Smith is trying to take Albertans out of the Canada Pension Plan. And what do we have from the Leader of the Conservative Opposition, Mr. Speaker? Weak sauce and platitudes. The pretender to the throne can stand up here right today and say a full-throated defense of Canada Pension Plan while his 30 Alberta MPs stand in silence. Will he or won't he? I know we will, Mr. Speaker, and Albertans can count on us defending them every single day along with their pensions.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, that carbon tax question was for the Prime Minister on Prime Minister's question period today. And I know that I don't have my glasses on, but that guy doesn't look like the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker.
You're right,
I have a very simple motion. It says that given that the government has announced a temporary 3-year pause to the federal carbon tax on home heating oil, the House call on the government to extend that pause to all forms of heating oil, period. Will the Prime Minister have the courage to stand up and indicate whether the vote on this motion will be a free vote for his members?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Those of us on this side of the House prefer to do good public policy rather than simply just play politics. I know that is an idea that seems to be foreign to the Leader of the Opposition. Heating oil is 2 to 4 times expensive as natural gas. It is a particularly acute issue for people in a number of provinces, not just in Atlantic Canada. The program that we are putting into place applies across the country. It is to ensure that we are addressing concerns around affordability in a thoughtful way while also addressing concerns around climate change, which I'm sure their children will tell them is a very important issue.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois motion that we'll be voting on later today calls on the government to review its immigration targets starting in 2024 after consulting Quebec and the provinces on how many immigrants they are able to welcome. And yet the minister is ready to unveil his targets, even though nobody's been consulted. Quebec's immigration minister confirmed it earlier today. There has been no consultation. So instead of doing one thing and voting for something else, will the minister cancel his press conference later today and consult Quebec before announcing his immigration targets? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, first of all, that's false. We have consulted Quebec. Our officials speak with their officials every day. I also spoke directly with the minister about the targets and targets for refugees as well. I've asked them to make an additional effort. Obviously, we're consulting. We're not always in agreement, but I would ask the member to look at the plan and look at the Quebec-Canada agreement, which says to be determined. So there are still elements that are up to Quebec to decide. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, there's a limit to how much you can say that doesn't have any meaning. Quebec hasn't been consulted on the federal immigration targets. Quebec confirmed that today. That means that the targets that the federal government is going to announce today don't take into account Quebec's ability to welcome immigrants. Does the minister know how many classrooms he's going to have to open to welcome new immigrants in 2024? Because he knows we're going to have more speech therapists, more psychotherapists, and more teachers. If the minister doesn't have those answers, is he at least going to cancel his press conference, go get the answers from Quebec and the provinces? The Honourable Minister. Well, in an hour and a half, people will have the opportunity to see the plan itself. I would ask them to have a look at it, but when it comes to Quebec, since 1991, we have the Canada-Quebec Agreement, and under that agreement, we send $700 million a year to Quebec, and do we ask them what's done with it? No, that's the kind of relationship we have. Maybe we should be asking questions, but the reality is that they can spend that money to adapt their ability to welcome immigrants, and we will support them in that. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
The Prime Minister has made it very clear that only those who vote for Liberals will get relief on their home heating, which has divided Canada and undermined the fight against climate crisis. Canadians want to do the right thing, but they can't, for example, navigate the onerous government programs for a heat pump and end up giving up. So instead of dividing Canadians, will the Prime Minister tax the excess profits of oil and gas companies and use that revenue to help all Canadians? Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I would encourage the Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party to do his homework. In terms of an onerous program, people who actually are going to be in receipt of a heat pump go up and sign online, and 3 days later they get a check to ensure that they can actually do the installation. There is no onerous program, Mr. Speaker. At the end of the day, we have developed a plan to address a key affordability issue in a manner that is consistent with fighting climate change. It is good public policy, and we will carry it out.
The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
The government's been clear. You have to vote Liberal if you want some help with home heating. It's as if it's the Duplessis era all over again. And who benefits from this? The big oil and gas companies, who continue to receive grants and subsidies from the federal government and who continue to make record profits. Will the Prime Minister stop taking us back to the era of Duplessis and help all Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The program that we're discussing today applies everywhere in Canada. It's something that's very important. We've put in place a program to ensure that there's affordability for Canadians and also to ensure that we can fight climate change. It's good policy. It's something that's very important for Canadians. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
For the Prime Minister, his lone Liberal MP in Edmonton was asked, quote, Western Canada that they're being left out of this whole home heating oil and the exemption for home heat from the carbon price. Should natural gas be added to that? He said, no, I'm not concerned at all. He then went on to say that if Albertans want to have the exemption, they can switch their furnaces over to oil. Does the Prime Minister agree with his member from Edmonton that Albertans should spend thousands of dollars putting in a more emitting source of energy just to avoid paying the carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister.
The hockey team that plays in my home city is called the Oilers, and we just handed a defeat to his former team, the Flames. But that being said, Mr. Speaker, if I misspoke, let me be clear in this House. Albertans right now can actually use a federal program to go from natural gas to a heat pump with a $5,000 credit from our government or a $40,000 interest-free loan. It's the Green Homes Program, it's the Green Loans Program, and if Premier Smith wants to extend free home pumps to Albertans to get off of heating oil, she can join Atlantic Premiers and work with the feds to make exactly that happen.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I can understand why the Prime Minister didn't want to stand up and defend that comment from his Liberal member. But, you know, this comment is similar to what we heard from Paul McLaughlin. He's the President of the Rural Municipalities of Alberta. And he said, and I quote, "If I have an understanding that I can buy heating oil, which is effectively kerosene, and I can buy it with no carbon levy, I will change all my grain drying and my barn heating to heating oil." I'll tell you right now, there are folks doing the math. So the government is now incentivizing farmers to spend money shifting from natural gas drying and heating over to oil heating, which has higher emissions. This makes no sense. Why won't he just shake off this lunacy and axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Heating oil, perhaps the honourable member does not understand this, heating oil is 2 to 4 times as expensive as natural gas. It is a particularly acute issue with respect to heating and affordability. I would tell you, though, that he should also be aware that the exemption is for 3 years, during which time people are expected to implement heat pumps to ensure that they actually have an affordable way to address this issue, but in a manner that is consistent with fighting climate change, something, again, that the honourable leader either doesn't believe in or certainly doesn't think is important.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
While the question was for the Prime Minister, I'm glad this member answered, because he reminded Atlantic Canadians that it is just a pause and that if they re-elect this Prime Minister, they will get a massive tax increase on their home heating oil. And where is all the money going? We now know that 60% of Canadians pay more in carbon taxes than they get back in rebates. The difference is funding this wasteful government. We now know that a senior member of the Liberal government's bureaucracy compared their billion-dollar green fund to the sponsorship scandal, saying that it was massive incompetence. Who got rich and who will have to pay?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Innovation welcomes the decision of the Auditor General to conduct an audit, and he also welcomes the invitation that he received to committee next week, where he will be answering Conservative questions with respect to this entire issue, Mr. Speaker. I would also note that the organization has agreed to cooperate fully and is enabling all documents and information to be provided to the Auditor General. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Now the carbon tax chaos continues. The incoming Leader of the Liberal Party, Mark Carney, has weighed in and said that he, quote, I would have looked for other ways to provide support than the route chosen, not least of because what is important is that clarity in terms of the overall plan, the overall direction. So now we have an incoming Liberal leader taking pot shots at an outgoing Liberal Prime Minister who is in hiding. How much longer can Canadians deal with this carbon tax chaos before we get an election and choose a common sense Conservative candidate?
Before I pass on to the Parliamentary Secretary to answer the question, I'd like to remind all members, and out of profound respect to the position and the office of the Leader of the Opposition, I again want to remind all members to please take a look at the statement which I made regarding decorum in the House in terms of understanding what all members have to do in terms of their work. I'll pass on the question to the Parliamentary Secretary to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's 2023, and if you don't have a plan to fight climate change and protect the environment, then you don't have a plan for the economy or for affordability either. And it's very clear that the Conservative plan is just to cut funding for social services like the Canada Child Benefit and our dental plan and seniors funding and the dental benefit, which has just recently surpassed 200,000 children, Mr. Speaker. The Conservative plan to fix global inflation by cutting people's services is not going to work. It's risky, irresponsible, and it's absolutely reckless, just like the Conservative leader.
Again, I'd like to remind all members in the questions and their answers is that you will want to make sure that you are not impugning to individual members questions that I raised regarding their courage, their intelligence, or even their presence in the House. I ask all members, please, to exercise some great restraint and decorum. We can have passionate debates in this House, and there are ways which we can do so within the rules that have been established by this place. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, instead of answering my questions and engaging me in debate, the Prime Minister forces yet another random Liberal to read off PMO talking points about the carbon tax chaos that is unfolding in this country. He's got one province threatening lawsuits, another not collecting the tax at all. He's got NDP provincial governments and parties turning against him, even though he's in coalition with that same party. Will he end the carbon tax chaos and agree to my motion to simply treat every single Canadian equally and take the tax off so that Canadians can keep the heat on?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure that the honourable member is actually listening to the responses, but at the end of the day, heating oil is 2 to 4 times as expensive as natural gas. It is a particularly acute issue with respect to affordability. We have come up with a program that will enable folks to be able to put in place something that will save them significant money while being consistent with the fight against climate change. It is, I would say, appalling that in this day and age, we still have a party in this chamber, the Conservative Party of Canada, that has no policy and not even any belief in the reality of climate change. It is time that that changed, and Canadians will make that happen in the next election.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Prime Minister said he would have Wednesday Prime Minister's question period, that he would show up for work and answer questions. But here we are less than a week after he had to back down and pause his signature policy, the massive new carbon tax. His plan now is to quadruple that tax to 61 cents a litre, forcing seniors everywhere to choose between eating and heating. If that's really the right thing to do, then why doesn't he have the guts to stand up and defend that policy before Canadians here and now?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The price on pollution is one part of a comprehensive approach to addressing the climate issue. It is implemented in a manner that is affordable. The majority of Canadians get more money back than they pay on the price on pollution. Having a thoughtful approach to climate change is an important part of being a real and realistic political party in this country. You cannot actually have an environmental policy without a climate policy. You cannot actually have an effective economic plan for the future without recognizing the reality of climate change. It is time they entered the modern era.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois motion that the minister is going to support later today talks about successful immigration. Well, immigration can't be successful when the targets don't take into account the ability to welcome new immigrants. And the Conference Board revealed yesterday a huge number of immigrants who are leaving Canada. They're disappointed. There were 60,000 who left in 2017 and then 67,000 who left 2 years later. Among the reasons are the lack of access to housing and the difficult time they're having getting into the economy. Can the minister go back, do his homework, consult Quebec instead of announcing targets that are completely disconnected from our ability to welcome new immigrants? The Honourable Minister. It's clear that we always need to do the best that we can to make sure people immigrate to society, but what we're seeing is an unprecedented number of people who want to come to Canada. And the reality in all of this, Mr. Speaker, is that we see the number of people who want to come to Canada because it's a great country for welcoming new immigrants. If the Bloc Québécois is saying that we can't welcome those immigrants, I think that's bad faith on their part. Before I give the floor to the Honourable Member for Saint-Jean, I would just like to encourage all members who have not been recognized by the Speaker to please leave the floor to those who have been recognized to ask their questions and to answer questions. The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, Quebec has confirmed that they were not consulted. That means that the immigration targets that the minister is going to unveil later today don't take into account the offer of services. They don't take into account the number of seats in our schools, the number of places in daycares, our ability to teach new immigrants French, the housing crisis, infrastructure that we need to build to increase, to support the increased numbers of the population. So if it's not based on any of that, what are the minister's targets based on? Astrology? The stars? The Honourable Minister. Well, I'm not sure about astrology, Mr. Speaker, but the member across the way was in the House, or rather was clearly not listening yesterday when I gave my speech, because I listed everything that we've done in collaboration with Quebec to make sure that things go well. And this agreement between Canada and Quebec has been in place as long as the bloc has existed, since 1991. And this jurisdiction remains with Quebec. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
And this question is for the Prime Minister, that the carbon tax chaos is unfolding within the Liberal tent itself. We saw last week, just as I was about to hold a thunderous rally of 1,000 common-sense Nova Scotians to axe the tax, the Prime Minister was in a sweaty ball on the ground. He had to flip-flop and hold a hastily called and humiliating press conference. Now, Mark Carney has come out against his flip-flop, and Percy Down, a loyal Liberal senator, has called for the Prime Minister to resign because of his fiscal irresponsibility. Is that why he's hiding under his desk and refusing to answer questions today?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Other than trying to find ways to do indirectly what he is not actually allowed to do directly, the one thing that is consistent about the Leader of the Opposition is that he loves to pat himself on the back continuously. At the end of the day, what we are interested in on this side of the House is good public policy. We have put into place a plan that will assure affordability for Canadians, that applies across the country, that does so in a manner that actually addresses the reality of climate change. Once again, it is appalling and a shame that the Conservative Party does not believe in climate change, has no plan to do anything about it.
Exactly.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
This Liberal senator, Mr. Percy Down, wrote, and I quote, "The opportunity for a Conservative government has been created by a lack of fiscal responsibility by the Liberal government, and the damage it has caused our economy is now showing up in the opinion polls. Within the Liberal Party, many members who are in favor of fiscal responsibility have given up on this current iteration of the Liberal Party, and hence the leader should resign." Yet he won't stand and answer questions, even though his itinerary shows that he was in this building today. Wow. If he won't show up and do his job, why won't he get out of the way? Because I will. Yeah.
Over the last 2 weeks, many members have taken upon themselves to quote my statement back to me, and I'm quite happy to defend that statement. As your chair, again, I will say that it is important for us to recognize that all members have duties, all members of this House, regardless of which side you have, which sometimes takes them out of this chamber to do their duties. That's the reason. That is the reason why. That is the reason why that we try not to mention whether or not the member is present or not in the House. It's part of the duties. So we are going to continue on. I believe there is the Honourable House Leader is going to answer this question.
Mr. Speaker, I find the last thing that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition said particularly troubling, because it is Canadians who decide who sit in this House and not the Leader of the Opposition. But, Mr. Speaker, let me be very clear that it's troubling, but it's not surprising, because when he was the Minister of Democratic Reform, Mr. Speaker, he made it harder for 150,000 of Canada's most vulnerable citizens to vote. He was also sanctioned by Elections Canada for violating electoral law. Right. While what he's saying is completely inappropriate, it is unsurprising given his track record and his lack of respect for democracy. Thank you.
Again, colleagues, it is so important. Colleagues, sit down. Hello.
Order.
Colleagues, it is important, once again, to not call in.
Sit down, Speaker is up.
Could I ask the member, please, from Surrey, to please allow me to continue. Colleagues, I ask all members to please exercise discretion. These are the things which you all raised with me and others in terms of improving the discretion. So I'm going to ask the Honourable Leader of the Colleagues.
He should be sitting down.
May I ask all colleagues, excuse me, colleagues, temperatures are running hot. Temperatures are running hot today. If I could ask all members, please, to sit down. May I ask all members to respectfully sit down, please?
All members.
May I ask all members to respectfully sit down until I recognize them to speak? Please. The honourable member, the honourable leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I can understand as these Liberal members watch their Prime Minister in a panicked huddle in the fetal position, shaking and trembling, that they are losing control of themselves. The last few days of carbon tax chaos has been very hard on them, and now their leader is defending them. The minister says we should let Canadians decide. So why don't we pause the carbon tax on all home heat until the vote, when Canadians will decide whether they want the Prime Minister's plan to hike the tax 61 cents a litre, or my common sense plan to axe the tax for everyone forever.
The Honourable Minister.
Things, Mr. Speaker, that we as Liberals are united on. We are united on the fact that the leader of the opposition is trying to destroy the action that our government is taking on climate change. Not only our government, governments across the world that are finally turning the tide, because he wants to go back to the time when they were attacking climate action. Mr. Speaker, we're united in the fact that we led the G7 in 2020 and 2022 in growth, that we're going to be number one again in 2024, that 64,000 jobs were created in Canada. Which country would he change places with? When he denigrates Canada, what country does he think better? Because this is the greatest country in the world, and we will stand up for it, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, we have someone now auditioning for the job of Prime Minister. There we go. And the cat's away. The mice will play, but we don't need any more of this chaos. The NDP would actually do its job and hold this government to account. They would announce today they would vote in accordance with the views of the NDP in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and now Manitoba, all of whom agree that people in cold climates, whether it be in Timmins or Kapuskasing or Churchill, should enjoy tax-free heat. So will they vote to keep the heat on by taking the tax off, or will they once again serve this out-of-touch Prime Minister?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said a number of times, and perhaps the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has not heard me, the home heating oil is up to 4 times as expensive as natural gas. It creates challenges with respect to affordability for Canadians. We have come forward with a plan that applies in every province and territory in this country that will address that particular issue in a manner that will be affordable, that will ensure long-term savings for families, but will do so in a manner that continues the fight against climate change, a fight against climate change that would not happen if he was in the other side of the House.
The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
Yesterday, a Palestinian refugee camp was bombed by the Israeli Defense Forces. We saw lifeless children being pulled out of the rubble. We heard agonizing screams of the worst human suffering. Palestinians in Gaza are being used as human shields and being bombed for crimes they haven't committed. Canada cannot stand by while innocent people die. We must demand a ceasefire and a release of all hostages now. How can this Prime Minister defend abstaining from the UN call for a ceasefire?
You're here.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think with every member of this House of Commons, we are looking at the situation in Gaza and in Israel as a crisis that is of proportions that are dire and are causing us to lose sleep at night. And so we continue to negotiate the best way possible for hostages to be released. We continue to work at getting humanitarian aid into the area and getting Canadians out. We will continue to monitor the situation even as hearts are breaking. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Burnaby South.
The media have reported that members of the Canadian Armed Forces are currently in Israel. Canada cannot participate in the bloodshed and death of innocent people. The Prime Minister has not called for a ceasefire, and he is not joining in the calls of the United Nations. Can the Prime Minister confirm that no Canadian troops will take part in the war? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very clear. We are not providing military assistance to Israel. What we're doing, Mr. Speaker, is we're providing force protection for Canadians and assisting the Canadian Embassy in Israel with contingency planning. This is similar to CANSOMCOM presence and assistance we have provided in other instances, including in Sudan. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
The Honourable Member from Richmond Centre.
Mr. Speaker, our government are focused on building a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system. But we know that this will not be possible without the hard work of all our early childhood educators. Attracting and retaining educators is critically important, and for too long, their working condition and compensation have not met the desired standard. To the Minister, what is our government doing to change this situation across the country and in my home province of British Columbia?
The Honourable Member, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, early childhood educators deserve to be well compensated and respected. That's why on Monday, alongside the province of British Columbia, my colleague, the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, announced a $2 per hour wage increase for eligible early childhood educators effective December 1st of this year, Mr. Speaker. In the first 2 years, Mr. Speaker, British Columbia has created an additional 10,000 childcare spaces, and parents have been saving up to $550 per month per child, Mr. Speaker. This is what happens when governments work together. We can deliver even more for Canadians.
The Honourable Member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
After 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, Canadians are struggling to eat, heat and house themselves, but money from the carbon tax is lining the pockets of Liberal insiders. One government official said that it is sponsorship scandal level giveaway. It's clear that this Prime Minister isn't worth the cost when his billion-dollar green slush fund already has $40 million under investigation. One insider, Annette Verscharen, is a friend of the Prime Minister. It turns out she's also chair of the board. Can the Prime Minister stand up and tell us how much his friend received in contracts from his billion-dollar slush fund?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Mr. Speaker, I find it interesting that the Conservative member began his question by talking about the affordability crisis here in Canada, but didn't end it that way. Allow me to address the fact that Canadians are struggling right now and that the supports that we have put in place are helping them to make ends meet, Mr. Speaker, whether it be the supports through our childcare program, whether it be supports to Canadians who are having a hard time paying for their rent or paying for their mortgage, Mr. Speaker. We have lifted over 2.3 million Canadians out of poverty since coming into government, Mr. Speaker. These programs work, and we will continue to make sure that Canadians benefit from them.
The Honourable Member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
It's astounding to hear that this member is saying that this program works. This program is under investigation. $40 million, that's the subject of gross mismanagement and conflicts of interest in the Prime Minister's billion-dollar green slush fund. 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, they're picking Canadians' pockets with this carbon tax and putting it into Liberal insiders' pockets. This is a Prime Minister that clearly isn't worth the cost. His friend is chair of the board. She is receiving contracts. Can they tell us exactly how much of the money they've taken out of Canadians' pockets that he's put in the pocket of his friend?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned earlier, with respect to SDTC, the Minister of Innovation welcomes the decision of the Auditor General to conduct a full audit. The SDTC has agreed to provide all of the information and documents necessary to the committee, and I understand that the Minister of Innovation will be appearing before the committee next week in order to answer everyone's questions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, the Prime Minister's new Liberal scandal has exploded once. This one is the billion-dollar Green Fund slush fund, which is being investigated by the Auditor General. This has come from the bloc-supported carbon tax. Daniel Leblanc from Radio-Canada stated that this is similar to the sponsorship scandal. Can the Prime Minister rise today and clearly say which Liberal friends have benefited from this bad generosity? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, what we expect of organisations is that they respect the strictest guidelines of governance. As I said earlier, the Minister for Innovation warmly welcomed the conclusions of the Auditor General of Canada to proceed with an audit, and the Minister himself will appear before the committee next week in order to respond to questions. Thank you very much. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, whistleblowers are very disappointed by how slow the government has been acting. In the same report, a high-ranking bureaucrat said this was negligence and laziness, purely and simply. That's what this bureaucrat has said about this Liberal government's management. After 8 years of this Liberal government, another proof that they are not worth the cost. Why did the Prime Minister drag his heels in this affair, which does look like the sponsorship scandal at the end of the day? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I can confirm today that the Department is working in close collaboration with the Office of the Auditor General on the question, and this since the very beginning of their work. As I said earlier on, the Minister for Innovation warmly welcomes the Auditor General's decision to move forward with an audit. Mr. Speaker, the Minister will appear before committee and Conservative questions and other parties' questions next week at committee. The Honourable Member for Terrebonne. Mr. Speaker, 250,000 businesses are threatened with bankruptcy if the federal government does not defer payment of the emergency account loans without loss of subsidy. If the government thinks it's expensive to help SMEs, it hasn't calculated how much it costs to abandon them. How many businesses will be unable to repay the loan in full? How many recoveries will it have to initiate to get its money back? How many workers will end up on employment insurance? Mr. Speaker, when will the Minister finally realise that it will cost her dearly to bankrupt 250,000 companies? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, our government understands that small businesses are still trying to get over the pandemic, and that is a reason for which we recently announced a one-year extension for reimbursements, more flexibility for financing, and more time to have access to other loans. This on top of an increase that we have brought to the Canadian childcare benefit, and so that childcare can be only $10 a day, so that more women can enter the labour force. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Terrebonne. Mr. Speaker, that kind of information is disinformation. It's hard to believe that we have to explain to a government that it's not economically viable to cause 250,000 businesses bankruptcies. But we'll soldier on. The government thinks that by being tough on our SMEs, it is helping to fight inflation. Quite the contrary. With bankruptcies, it will create scarcity in the supply of goods and services, and that could be reflected in the prices paid by Canadians. It could therefore increase the cost of living as well as sabotaging our local economies. Why run this risk when the government could simply be more flexible with our SMEs? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think that scaring our SMEs is the right solution. We were there to help them with the emergency fund, with wage subsidies, with rent assistance. It's the federal government that gave $8 out of $10 in all assistance throughout the pandemic. We're here for SMEs, and we are now transitioning towards a more private sector approach. So we invite companies to make the transition. There are still 3 years of flexibility with us and with various programme conditions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for the Environment has said that Under his watch, he will never grant further exemptions for the carbon tax. He seems to think that only the Atlantic provinces are suffering from carbon taxes, and at the same time, what is the Bloc up to? They want to radically increase Liberal taxes. It's just Conservatives that care for Quebecers. Can the Minister finally get out of the way so that carbon taxes can be cancelled throughout the country? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And once again, there is no federal carbon tax in Quebec. Conservatives have not understood, haven't created a plan to fight climate change and to reduce emissions. They have absolutely no vision on how we could adapt to climate change's effect. This is not only irresponsible, but it's also just a proof of incompetence, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Miramichi Grand Lake.
Mr. Speaker, last week a desperate Prime Minister admitted his punishing carbon tax is making life more expensive for all Canadians. He also said, if re-elected, the NDP Liberal government will quadruple the carbon tax on home heating, gas and groceries. After 8 years, this Prime Minister is now admitting he's just not worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister stop the gimmicks, stop the temporary measures, stop the bogus claims and axe the carbon tax for all Canadians for good?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If there was ever any doubt, the Leader of the Conservatives has made it perfectly clear for Canadians. Conservatives have no plan to fight climate change. They want to take Canada backwards on climate action. The Conservatives all ran on a promise in 2021 to price carbon, but when they ditched Aaron O'Toole, they ditched any progressive values they once had and the words climate change from their vernacular. Mr. Speaker, their lack of a plan on climate change is risky and irresponsible. They should get with the program and realize that climate change is a real problem in Canada and around the world.
The Honourable Member from the South Shore St. Margaret's.
After 8 years, the panicking Prime Minister is plummeting in the polls, and the nervous Nelly Atlantic Liberal MPs are whining, please help save us. The NDP Liberal government solution? Put the carbon tax up 61 cents after the next election. In other words, vote Liberal to quadruple the carbon tax after the next election, or vote Conservative to axe the tax. This flip-flopping Prime Minister now admits he's not worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister come clean and tell Atlantic Canadians just how much will the carbon tax cost after the next election?
The Honourable Minister.
The Conservative leader's comment about the thunderous rally that was held on the East Coast, and perhaps refer to the gigantic one that was held in my riding. There's a user on Twitter called The Answer Is No, and it's kind of funny. They spread it around. They criticize me quite often, too. But the trick is they ask a question, but the answer is always no. So last week, his question was, did the Conservative leader's gigantic rally draw more people than a Saturday at the St. John's dump? The answer is no. No, Mr. Speaker. It did not. As one Mount Pearl resident noted, there were more people at the Cowan Plaza Bingo. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Alfred Pélan. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 has demonstrated the importance of pandemic preparedness. Vaccination is one of the most effective tools we have to help protect public health in general from COVID-19 and to prevent severe forms of the disease. Can the Minister for Health inform the House of his visit to the new Moderna plant in Laval and what this means for Canadians? The Honourable Minister for Health. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for his excellent question, and thank you for his excellent work. It is clear, Mr. Speaker, that vaccines are responsible for saving millions of lives. Canada had one of the best responses. I had the privilege of visiting the new Moderna plant in Laval last Friday, a site where future vaccines will be manufactured right here in Canada. This is essential. It is essential to produce the next generation of vaccines here in Canada to protect our health and security, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Calgary, Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, the desperation of this NDP Liberal government proves that the Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Liberals admitted that the carbon tax exemption was not granted to Western Canadians because they don't vote Liberal. The Minister for Edmonton Centre and the member for Calgary Skyview are either so ineffective that the Prime Minister just ignores them, or they actually agree that Alberta should pay more to keep the heat on. Will the Prime Minister take the heat off home heating for all Canadians? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Member for the question. And as he knows, we have the opportunity in Alberta to join the federal government and provide heat pumps for those who need it. But Mr. Speaker, let's look at the facts. What is the MP for Calgary Skyview and the MP for Edmonton Centre happens to be me? What have we done for Albertans? We have worked with this Liberal government to cut child poverty over by half, Mr. Speaker. We've delivered a Canada Child benefit to our ridings. Mr. Speaker, we have implemented $10 a day childcare, and we got a new pipeline to Tidewater, something the people on that side of the aisle could never accomplish, Mr. Speaker. 2 Liberals have done more than 30 MPs in 6 years. They don't like it, we do, and so do Canadians.
The Honourable Member from Yorkton Melville.
Well, this Prime Minister is finally admitting he's not worth the cost. He removed his punitive carbon tax on home heating oil, temporarily relieving the burden on the backs of 3% of Canadians. Over 90% of Saskatchewan households are heated with natural gas. Higher taxes for them because they don't vote Liberal? Well, Saskatchewan cleaned its house in 2019, and now coast to coast to coast, Canadians are calling for a majority, common-sense Conservative government that will axe the tax. How about them apples, Mr. Prime Minister?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said a couple of times, heating oil is up to 4 times as expensive as natural gas. It creates affordability challenges. We've actually put into place measures that will ensure affordability, that families will save up to $2,500 a year going forward, but in a manner that actually addresses the climate crisis. I would say to my honourable member, she also may want to do her homework with respect to programs that are in place that enable the replacement of natural gas-fired furnaces with heat pumps. It's called the Green Buildings Plan. It's called the Green Buildings Loan.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, Quebecers now know that it costs a lot to vote for the Bloc Québécois. The Bloc Québécois voted for the second carbon tax, and this Liberal government has decided to create 2 classes of Canadians. On the one hand, Atlantic Canadians, and on the others. Quebecers and other Canadians will not be entitled to the temporary rebate on the carbon tax. This Prime Minister says that there will be no other exemptions. This makes no sense. After 8 years, this government has lost control and Canadians are getting poorer. Can the government finally get its act together and cancel this carbon tax across the country now? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm rather surprised by the participation of my colleagues from Quebec on the other side with the Conservatives. Could my colleague ask his colleague for Louis Saint-Laurent why, when he was at the Quebec National Assembly, why he said that he was very satisfied with the carbon pricing system? This is what he said. We are satisfied that there is now a registry for greenhouse gas emissions. We're happy that this information will be published. It shows that we are all united by transparency here in this chamber. A shame. Shame on them. Colleagues.
L'honorable député, collègue, à l'ordre.
Order, colleagues. The honourable member for Sudbury.
To the detriment of our economy, the Conservative Party is blocking two vital pieces of legislation that will create sustainable jobs, bring workers to the table, and build important renewable energy projects. First, they blocked workers from speaking at committee, then they cancelled debate in this chamber, and now they are filibustering the Natural Resources Committee to stop consideration of C-50 and C-49. Can the minister from this House inform the House about the importance of the Sustainable Jobs Act and Atlantic Accords Act?
L'honorable ministre.
For her community and for workers across Canada, the Atlantic Accords Act and the Canadian Sustainable Jobs Act are key to unlocking generational economic opportunities for Canada. The Atlantic Accords Act allow for the development of an offshore wind industry that will create thousands of jobs in Atlantic Canada. The Sustainable Jobs Act bring workers to the table and will equip them with the tools and the skills they need to thrive. I call upon the Conservative Party to end their wasteful filibuster and allow committee members to consider these bills. They should heed the call of premiers, of industry, of workers, and of this House to advance C-50 and C-49. They are simply wasting time and the money of taxpayers.
The honourable member from Vancouver, Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, the NDP moved a motion at Health Committee to launch an independent public inquiry into Canada's COVID response. Shockingly, the Conservatives joined with the Liberals to defeat this common-sense proposal. New Democrats believe Canadians deserve transparency and accountability on how their government handled every aspect of the pandemic. No stone should be left unturned. Can the Prime Minister explain why his party teamed up with the Conservatives to block this overdue essential inquiry?
The honourable minister.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable colleague for his question and his work in this space. As he knows, and as I mentioned earlier in question period, Canada had among the best responses to COVID-19 anywhere in the world. Thanks to vaccines and to other measures, we saved literally hundreds of thousands of lives, something we should be deeply proud of. We are going to be conducting not only a review that the member is talking about, a review, forward-facing review, but there are all kinds of reviews now to take the lessons that we learned during the pandemic and apply them to our entire health system. I want to thank everybody who was on the front lines of keeping us safe. We're going to honor that work by making sure we learn and do everything we can to keep people safe.
L'honorable député de Spadina-Fort.
The honourable member for Spadina-Fort York.
Speaker, 24 Liberal MPs supposedly represent Toronto. Using the Minister of Rural Development's handbook to get things done, how come none of those 24 MPs stood up for people sleeping on Toronto streets? They were also missing in action to get the government to honour its promise to assist Toronto with our COVID budget shortfall. Mr. Speaker, many Torontonians will struggle to heat and hopefully keep their homes this winter. They'd like a carbon tax deferral too. Mr. Speaker, while the two Liberal MPs from Alberta can hold their regional caucus in a phone booth, can the Prime Minister explain how this Toronto 24 have simply disappeared?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
The honourable parliamentary secretary.
Fails to mention the advocacy of Toronto MPs that pushed for this government to invest no less than $290 million for the City of Toronto so it could respond to homelessness challenges. And that's exactly what's happening. We will continue to work with that municipality, with other municipalities across the country. This is an unacceptable situation that we find ourselves in, but we have a choice. Do we respond, and how do we respond? We respond with cooperation, Mr. Speaker. We respond by working together, and that's what we'll continue to do.
I wish to mention to members the presence in the gallery of the winners of the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada Awards, including the John C. Pauliani Award, the Brockhouse Canada Prize for Interdisciplinary Research in Science and Engineering, the Donna Strickland Prize for Social Services and Engineering Research, the Synergy Awards for Innovation, and the Arthur B. MacDonald Fellowships. Ladies and gentlemen.
Appel au règlement.
A point of order, the Honourable Minister of Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have two. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in the House in front of my colleagues to answer a concern which was raised yesterday to an answer that I gave to the Bloc Québécois. Yesterday, I used a certain language that I would not repeat here today, but I understand that the words used may have hurt some, so I would like to take those back and apologize. I thank the Honourable Minister not only for withdrawing his comments, but for his apologies. I think that adds to the decorum of this House. I recognize, once again, a second point of order for the same minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Pursuant to subsection 94(1) of the Immigration Refugee Protection Act, I have the pleasure to table in both official languages the 2023 annual report to Parliament on immigration. Monsieur le Président, conformément.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to subsection 94(1) of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, I have the pleasure to table in both official languages the 2023 annual report to Parliament on immigration. For